Welcome, and thank you all for being here. My name is Pamela Buckingham, and I'm the Communications and Marketing Manager for Rosie the Riveter Trust, the official nonprofit partner of Rosie the Riveter World War II Homefront National Historical Park in Richmond, California. I'll be moderating our discussion this evening. We often think of history as something fixed in time, something that's behind us. But history reminds us that the past is always in conversation with the present. It lives in our landscapes, in our institutions, and in the stories we choose to elevate or to overlook. At this moment, as conversations about representation, memory, and even censorship shape public spaces across the country, the work of historians and cultural practitioners take on renewed significance. So I'm delighted to be in conversation tonight with someone whose work, sits at the intersection of history, equity, and community engagement. I'm introducing you to Donna Graves tonight. Donna is an independent historian and urban planner based in Berkeley, California, whose bridges public history, preservation, and community engagement. She is widely recognized for developing innovative interdisciplinary projects that bring forward underrepresented stories and connect them to place. Her body of work spans local, state, and national initiatives, including significant contributions to Rosie the Riveter World War II Homefront National Historical Park, as well as projects that document Asian American, LGBTQ, and other historically marginalized communities, adding her energy and voice to the important cause of censorship of history in publics and historic spaces. Donna is an activist with the National Park Cultural Resource Coalition. Through her practice and activism, Donna has helped shape a more inclusive and participatory approach to public history, one that centers community voices and expands how we understand and experience the past. Thanks so much for being with us tonight, Donna.
Thank you. That was really nice. Thank you
Oh,
so much.
of course. This is such a great opportunity to have this time to really drill down into your work. So can you tell us how you started working in Richmond on the national park here?
hmm so I have kind of a checkered background. What I studied was art and architectural history, American social history, and urban planning. And I started out working in museums. I was
Mm,
really interested in the stories art could tell and
mm.
in how people who went to museums received those stories. But back in the 80s, when I was working in art museums, that wasn't the way the powers that be thought about their role. So that was when I switched and did a degree in urban planning. And while I was at UCLA, I ran a very innovative nonprofit called The Power of Place, started by a faculty member named Dolores Hayden. And its purpose was to use historic preservation, public art, urban design to mark sites in the downtown area that showed that Los Angeles had always been this incredible multiracial place. People at that point were still thinking of Los Angeles history as mostly Hollywood. So this was a very innovative new way of thinking about how to bring a much more diverse set of stories into public. And that really was a launching pad for the rest of my career. I moved back up to the Bay Area where I'd lived previously and had been working with some art nonprofits when the city of Richmond, I don't know whether they announced it or somebody just called me and said, we want to do something to recognize the women who worked at the Kaiser shipyards. And because I'd had experience developing commemorative projects in Los Angeles, we'd done what's called Biddy Mason's Place. It was a monument or a memorial to a very prominent 19th century African American woman who lived in downtown LA. I'd
Can you
also
Biddy, B-I-T-T?
Biddy Mason's Place.
Biddy. I'm sorry, I'm just taking some notes too.
That's
Mason
okay.
Boys.
She
Okay.
um
Cool.
she
Okay.
gained her freedom in a really important court case and then
Okay.
became an incredible figure in Los Angeles philanthropy in the latter half of the 19th
How
century.
interesting. Another person to go learn about.
Yeah. I'd also helped lead a project to do a monument to the Abraham Lincoln Brigade in San Francisco. They were the Americans who fought fascism in the Spanish Civil War.
Wow.
So I'd been already thinking about fascism and
Mhm.
Americans fighting against it. And then Richmond said, well, we want to do something to recognize the women who worked at the Kaiser shipyards. And
Mm.
I raised my hand and said, oh, I think I'm the right person. I have, experience and interest and knowledge that is really aligned with what you're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
We worked on the memorial for 3 years. And while I was doing that, I used my interest in urban history and found that there were all these places scattered across the city that dated to World War II that hadn't been changed much, whether it was the Kaiser Field Hospital or
Mm-hmm.
worker housing or daycare centers or shops that were built to serve these throngs of war workers. They were still there. And it was kind of a fluke that the Park Service stepped in. Um, Donna Powers, the city councilwoman who was the champion for the idea of recognizing the women at the Kaiser shipyards, had spoken to our congressperson, George Miller, and
Mm-hmm.
asked if, when it was done, we could have a sign by the side of the freeway directing people to the new Rosie the Riveter Memorial. Well, his staff didn't quite know what to make of that, and they thought, well, monuments, that's sort of the Park Service realm. So they contacted our regional office in San Francisco, who contacted me and said, oh, we've heard about what you're doing. They didn't say Congressman George Miller had told them about it. They just said, we've heard
Oh.
about what you're doing. And
Mm-hmm.
because we've been working a lot on getting community engagement and press, I thought, huh, they've been reading about it. And they said, we want to come see the memorial. And I went, it's not done, but I can drive you around the city and show you these places that are still amazingly embedded in the city of Richmond. And I'll show you the designs for the memorial that's not yet built. I knew the Park Service was interested in historic places. And so that all made sense. They did this tour and they realized they weren't telling the World War II homefront story anywhere and that it was a really important topic that the
Mm-hmm.
Park Service should address. So the Park Service, the city, and I worked pretty quickly on what's called a feasibility study, an argument to make to Congress that this should be authorized as a national park. It all came together in October 2000 when we dedicated the memorial. It was completed finally, and we were able to announce there was this new national park. I was kept on for, God, I think 10 years by the Richmond Redevelopment Agency
Okay.
as a half-time liaison between the city and the Park Service.
Oh,
And
wow. Okay.
and because there was so little staff and no staff that were historians, um, I was able to lay a lot of groundwork.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. I didn't know that about you. So you were kind of like one of the first interpreters.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Initially, the park the park historians from the Bay Area who would be engaged in the planning process were really, really interested in the process of shipbuilding and in Henry Kaiser. And they saw that as being the center of what this park should commemorate. And I felt that was really limited, that there were so many people who'd come to this city who might not find themselves in that story, but had also contributed, had also experienced the incredible social change and tumult of the home front, and that we needed to look further into the city for places and stories that could represent a more diverse record of the incredible transformation that the World War II home front represents.
What core values guide your work across such diverse projects?
Mm. Um, well, one of them is that I see history as a tool, just like Trump does, in a way.
Okay, say more about that.
Well, I mean, they are trying to use history to rewrite the past
Sure.
in a way that elevates some people and tries to re-erase others and tries to exert control
Mm,
over how we talk about what it means to be an American
okay.
and what our relationship to our government is.
Hmm.
And I also see history as something that is useful. I think it can expand our understanding of ourselves and other people. I think it can inspire us. I think history can be a cautionary tale.
Mm.
And so I'm always looking for how the stories that I find embedded in place and community can connect to the things we care about today. And that's one of the reasons Rosie the Riveter continues to fascinate me. At the time, we all recognized, um, I'm seeing someone saying hello from Canada in the chat.
Yeah. Hi.
Even as we were really starting to get the park going, we'd recognized that issues like providing housing for this population that had quadrupled in
Hmm.
just a short period of time, providing housing, providing childcare for workers, providing education for school kids, providing fire services for all of these new wood-framed buildings that were filling
Right.
in the
Can you
empty
put
lots.
that period of time into context a little bit? Like, was it a month? Was it 6 months?
You mean planning the park or the transformation of
The
Richmond?
transformation, sorry.
Oh, it was really quick, actually. The city ballooned from around 23,000 to over 100,000 within 2 years.
Oh, wow.
And
Okay.
Richmond had been a landscape that it did have industry. It was this kind of interesting combination of industry. The
Hmm.
terminus of the Santa Fe Railroad was in Richmond. Uh, what's now Chevron Standard Oil was there
Hmm.
in the early beginning of the 20th
Right.
century, and other industries. But otherwise, and there was a downtown strip, McDonald Avenue. But many of the places that are now filled in neighborhoods were pretty open. People were pasturing cows. They
Hmm.
had, their own small lot truck farms. It was this combination of agriculture and industry and a little bit of urbanity.
Okay.
Um, and it changed overnight to help fight FDR's, what he called the arsenal of democracy.
Yeah. That's interesting that McDonald's was the main drag. I would have guessed 23rd, but
No, no, no.
wasn't there, I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah.
Wow. Rosie the Riveter has come to represent millions of women whose labor powered the World War II home front, but the image can be sometimes kind of flatten the complexity
Mhm.
of these women and their
Mhm.
lived experience. From your perspective, how did these women's work and lives transform ideas about women's labor and community life? And why is that important to understand Rosie as a collective story rather than like a single person or a single
Mm.
image?
You're hitting on so many things that I'd love to unpack.
Okay, let's unpack. Let's do
Let me
it.
do the collective one first.
Okay.
I have been thinking a lot about how we tell stories when we center heroic individuals or when we tell collective stories. And I'm sure everyone who's listening, if they live in the United States, has been faced with the recent heartbreaking revelations about Cesar Chavez. And that has made me think a lot about, again, about the stories we tell. I think this is truly a heartbreaking thing for everyone to face, um, because the cause of farm workers is so righteous. And
Mm-hmm.
there were so many gains made in the early years of the United Farm Workers that Chavez was one of the leaders of.
Mm-hmm.
But I also look at that and I go, we have such a, I don't know whether it's our society or whether it's more hardwired. Um, we have such a default way of telling stories that centers heroic individuals.
Mm-hmm.
Even in stories like this, where it's about massive social change, which could only happen with hundreds of thousands of people involved.
Right.
And so I think rather than those of us who really care about our past and how history is shared, rather than just feeling very depressed about all this is a moment for us to rethink things and to recognize that that way of storytelling doesn't serve us much of the time. To me, it's also an artifact of our society that I think of as patriarchal. The
Mm-hmm.
idea that there is one person, usually a man, who has to lead everybody else and who needs to be followed, that elevates humans, and we're all frail, we all have feet of clay. It elevates people to roles that they can abuse.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen that over and over. So I find this a really exciting moment to think about what do we learn from this? And one thing we learn is that places like Rosie the Riveter that center collective effort, collective stories that don't overlook conflict within those stories, even that don't try to flatten it,
Mm-hmm.
are even more valuable as examples of places and stories we can learn from today. Our beloved Bay Area writer Rebecca Solnit, who I'm sure many of you know, I've been thinking about this for weeks, and of course, she's already published something in The Guardian about this.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things she noted that I loved was reinforcing we already do recognize and value collective stories. Some of you have probably heard that the people of Minneapolis have been nominated for the Nobel Prize,
Yeah.
and the Nobel Prize has gone to other collective efforts,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's the World Food Program or the International Panel, Governmental Panel on Climate Change. I mean, we know how to do this. And Rosie is a place where we do that. So
Mm-hmm.
there's one piece of it, the collective.
Mm-hmm.
Remind me of the other.
Let's see. Uh, Women's lives being transformed through
Mm,
labor and community life.
mhm, mhm. Um, well, this probably is the period of American history, apart from the 70s when, second wave feminism became such a prominent social story.
Mm-hmm.
World War II is a time we look at and recognize all of these ideas we have about how people fit into categories and the kinds of grooves their lives should fit in were upended. And what's kind of sad about Rosie the Riveter in World War II is that it was always presented as this is just for the duration, ladies. We'll make these jobs available to you that you never would have been able to access previously.
Mm-hmm.
But and look, you can do them. There was all this amazement that women could weld, women could do all of these jobs that they were given access to. But then they were taken away. And it laid the groundwork, of course, for later efforts to expand women's rights. And I don't want to ignore the fact that women had always worked, and especially working class women had always worked outside of the home. So it's not as if that kind of entry into the labor force was brand new for all women.
Mm-hmm.
It was the middle class women who went and did dirty work at industries that were positioned as this new story. And it was a new story, and it was really important. And it changed our ability to imagine social transformation.
Hmm.
Even if it wasn't meant to be permanent, it changed us.
Well, it changed individual lives and it reshaped neighborhoods and industry
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
social relationships. What does looking at wartime labor through the lens of place and
Hmm.
community help us understand that we might otherwise miss?
Um, I have loved the opportunity to really dig into the texture of how Richmond changed spatially during those years.
I
I
like
mentioned
that. I like
I,
that.
I mentioned earlier that initially park planners were really focused on the shipyards and on the waterfront.
Hmm.
And I convinced the Park Service to let me do a study. Um, Celia, you can wait if you don't mind on those projects that are outside Richmond. Is that all right? Um, I did a very detailed study of other places in Richmond that could tell the World War II homefront story. It's called Mapping Richmond's World War II Homefront. I think it's online somewhere, but I poured through the Richmond Museum of History. Bless them. They're an amazing institution with an incredible collection. The Richmond Public Library has a great history room. And so, looking through all kinds of archival material and talking to people, I was able to see how incredibly dispersed these new uses of space were to support, this now huge city, whether
Hmm.
it was a new Red Cross Center or civil defense stations or the Richmond Public Library offering after-school program for school kids, because where were they going to go?
Right.
um, or new churches springing up to serve these people who wanted to come and worship in the way that felt familiar to them.
Hmm.
So, this incredible texture of daily life that changed to support the war effort um, it's still embedded all over Richmond. And I find that really exciting.
So that kind of answers a little bit of the next question I had was about deciding which places and stories matter. You
Mhm.
kind of outlined that. Um, the other piece of that question would be how do we make those more visible to the public? I mean, obviously through the park, but there's probably other ways too.
Mhm. Um, There are so many ways, I think, to make history vivid for people. We think of monuments or we think of a visitor center, we might think of interpretive panels, all of
Hmm.
which are kind of standard national park strategies.
Hmm.
Um, when I was working on an interpretive project for McDonald Avenue
Hmm.
and trying to make the history of that commercial corridor, which had always been Richmond's Main Street, more legible to people. We wanted to engage community members as much as possible while we started to see what kinds of stories were out there and what kind of meanings and associations people had with McDonald Avenue. And so
Hmm.
we did reverse walking tours. We had people lead us
Oh, that's
on
cool.
walking tours and tell us about their memories. We did photo and story gathering at the Richmond Museum of History and two very creative performing arts efforts that I think is a tool I would love to use more and I think could be used more in Richmond.
Mm.
Richmond has the East Bay Center for the Performing Arts, which is an amazing, long-standing youth
Mhm.
arts program downtown in a historic building. And we worked with young people who did performances based on oral history interviews we did with old timers.
Oh, wow.
And so the young people kind of inhabited the stories of these old timers about McDonald Avenue. And then
Hmm.
we had a discussion, intergenerational discussion about what does McDonald Avenue mean to you today? And it was fascinating and it was so touching.
Hmm.
The care that the young people took in representing this diverse set of older people
Oh.
and the concern that older people had for young people and the lives they were living. The
Mm-hmm.
other performing arts thing we did that was even more fun was there's a dancer in Bayview Hunter Point, Joanna Highgood, who said, let's do a dance swap. What that meant was we put out a call and invited people who would want to teach a dance they grew up doing
Oh,
in
cool.
the historic dance hall in the
Oh,
building that East Bay Center for the Performing
okay.
Arts is in.
Wow.
So we had everything from a Hmong elder leading us in a kind of circle dance that was a opening, sort of a
Oh,
welcoming dance. We had Eduardo Carrasco, who had welded in the shipyards, found his zoot suit and taught us how to jitterbug. We had another woman who'd come from Texas teach us how to do the electric slide. We had a couple young women teach hip hop moves. It was, again, this intergenerational gathering, uh, doing something they loved together in a place that historically had been a dance hall. So
mhm.
making that building live that way and making downtown's connections to people live, there are lots of ways to do that.
That's so cool. Um, you have some other kind of similar, well, I don't know, similar projects, but projects that kind of deal with those cross sections of community and ethnicity. A couple of them that come to mind are preserving California's Japantowns, which that's amazing. And then the other one is east of Main Street, mapping Asian Pacific Islander America. Those are
I've
both
had,
so cool.
yeah, I've had such good fortune in the last decades of being able to work with amazing people and groups. And I've done a fair amount of work on different aspects of Asian American history, especially Japanese American history. And both of those were done, um, one at the state scale. Preserving California's Japantowns was meant to answer the question of where were all those Japantowns that disappeared after everyone was rounded up and incarcerated?
Mhm.
Um, there are still vestiges of the historic Japantowns in San Francisco, San Jose, and LA. And the communities have been really working to elevate those places and protect them.
Mhm.
And this nonprofit group called the California Japanese American Community Leadership Council um, was really interested in, well, where were the others? So I worked with them with funding from the California State Library to literally go out and map 50 pre-war Japantowns and find what places still stood, where public memory had mostly been erased, and where it might be knit back together. Um, the East at Main Street project is national and it's Pan-Asian Pacific Islander,
Mhm.
and it's a crowdsourced
Oh, wow.
website. It was one of the early
It's interesting.
crowdsourced heritage websites using this great organization that at the time was called History Pin that had created a platform where people could upload photographs and tell stories about them. And there I was working with a community group that I've been involved with called Asian American Pacific Islanders in Historic Preservation.
Hmm.
For all of those projects that aren't so local as Richmond, it's been really important to find community partners and trusted community partners because you're asking people to give you their time, to give you their stories, sometimes to give you their memorabilia. And
Hmm.
that's all precious. And me dropping in from outside is not as welcoming a process as making sure you're really partnering with local groups and individuals who care about this too.
That's a great segue to my next question. How do you balance walking in as an academic and you're doing research with grassroots history, with like people on the ground who don't have a history background? And I think sometimes they don't realize that what they hold is so important.
Mhm,
What are
mhm,
some of the best practices that you've developed?
hmm. I'm not the world's most systematic thinker, Pam.
Okay.
I often work on it by intuition,
Okay.
but I think what I'd say is the academic part and the community part feel like they have a very natural synergy. The people who are developing academic history have to be informed, especially if it's within living memory, by community voices.
Mm-hmm.
And community voices can learn more about their own place and history and also feel that they are helping to shape the record if
Mm-hmm.
they're engaged in this kind of work. Um,
That's what I love most about this kind of work. It's
yeah, yeah.
how um, how grassroots democracy it is, really.
hmm
So
and people love telling their stories.
yeah, yeah.
And one of the reasons I love this work is I love listening to people's stories and I love seeing connections between multiple stories and place, etc. There can sometimes be a tension, obviously, between a community's received memory of
Mm-hmm.
an era or a place and what the record shows. And the one that I think is so interesting that I ended up dealing with in that McDonald Avenue project is a lot of, especially white people, older white people, when they were talking about McDonald's sort of going downhill
Mm-hmm.
after the 50s and 60s, they attributed it to, well, the Kaiser shipyards closed, uh,
Mm.
Richmond changed. The subtext was Richmond became more black. And then they'd say, and then Travellini's furniture store burned. There was a riot and it burned on McDonald Avenue. And I was like, wow, that's a dramatic thing. I
Yeah.
hadn't heard about that.
Wow. Okay.
I started researching it, talking to other people, and found that there was a riot. It was a race riot. The
Mm-hmm.
Richmond police had shot an unarmed young black man from North Richmond in downtown.
Goodness.
And this was 67, 68. And like other cities across the country, the longstanding um, hurt and hatred and defensiveness that African Americans felt about police actions against them erupted.
Mm-hmm.
And and Travellini's store burned down. Another
Get the name
person,
of the store again. I'm not catching it.
Travellini.
Travellini. Okay, Travellini.
Richmond's pre-war population, the largest ethnic group were Italian
Right.
immigrants.
Oh,
So
right.
they represented that
And
community.
that was a furniture store oh,
Where
okay.
many people would remember they got a little jewelry box when the women got a little jewelry box when they graduated from high school from Travellini's. So, it was a community,
Yeah.
beloved community store. Um,
I bet the Richmond Museum has one of those, don't
I
they?
bet they do too.
Yeah, you could probably see one there. That's amazing. Now I'm
But
gonna go
so
find out.
I really wanted to um, share that story and do it in the context of Richmond didn't go downhill right after the Kaiser shipyards left. It continued to be a thriving Bay Area city until larger forces like the federal government supporting investment in suburbs, not urban cores, meant its downtown commercial corridor struggled. And and that understanding among some white Richmonders that somehow the growing number of African American people in Richmond had been part of that story of downfall they understood their community having suffered. I really wanted to refute that. Say, no, Richmond thrived for decades. And Travellini burning, that followed a police officer shooting, I think he was 16.
Oh dear. Okay.
So the history is always more complex. We
Hmm.
are told stories about the places we live that might not be complete. And I like being able to complicate our understanding of things,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to our federal government, which right now wants a very simple story told.
Right, right. So it's kind of segues into my next question again. You're doing so good, Donna. We're doing great here. What does story collection, so
Mm.
talking, oral histories, interviews, um, what role does that play, especially like you're saying, when histories are contested or painful?
Well, I mean, there's so many answers to that. One is that it corrects a simplified record.
Right.
Um,
Correcting. Mm-hmm.
when the park was just getting started, I found out that Richmond had this community of Japanese American flower growers that had been operating there for over 100 years. And I went to the first iteration of park leadership and said, "Oh, we need to tell this story here." And they said, "No, we tell that at Manzanar." And I went, "No, that you tell the story of people being incarcerated,
Mm-hmm.
Los Angeles and Manzanar. And we are here in Richmond, where people had built up lives and communities and industry and were forcibly removed. And then, through the luck of having been able to purchase property when most Japanese Americans couldn't, were able to return and rebuild the community. And we need to tell that story.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I got money again from the California State Library. I wish they were as well funded as they used to be to research this story and do oral history interviews with Japanese Americans, but also with Italian Americans
Mm-hmm.
whose story was even more hidden.
Mm-hmm.
If you were an Italian immigrant living in Richmond and you hadn't yet gotten your citizenship, you were an enemy alien too, just like Japanese immigrants. And you
Mm-hmm.
couldn't stay in Richmond because it had been designated a defense prohibited zone.
Mm-hmm.
The Italians in Richmond who chose not to become citizens were usually the grannies and grandpas who continued to speak Italian, lived within their own community, didn't bother becoming a US citizen.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the beginning of the war, all of these elderly Italian residents had to move in the middle of a housing crisis. And it was not as visible as what happened to Japanese Americans, and the community felt shame. And so this project we did about 20 years ago was the first time that Italian Americans in Richmond publicly talked about this and talked about
Wow.
the injustice of it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so there's obviously a power in correcting narratives through getting those kinds of stories.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what other dimension of it do you want me to?
I think that's great. I think that that's a great place to leave that question. Can we pivot to LGBTQAI? Let's do that. Um, tell us about your work documenting LGBTQAI plus historic sites, and what did you learn about visibility and preservation of that particular
Yeah,
history?
yeah. Um, an architectural historian named Shane Watson in San Francisco and I decided we really should do what's called a historic context statement for San Francisco. That's where
Okay.
you survey an area and find places that tell a particular story.
Okay.
Traditionally, those might be like all the buildings designed by this one man in this one neighborhood, or all the Catholic churches of Richmond.
Okay.
We wanted to do this social history of
Okay.
LGBTQI San Francisco. And there was a funder, the Historic Preservation Fund Committee, that said, okay, so from 2012 to 2016, we worked on it. And it was one of the most fulfilling projects I've ever undertaken. I learned so much. I found that I was interviewing people who were really self-consciously trying to change history. So many of the interviews I've done for other projects, whether it's Japanese Americans or war workers in Richmond or elsewhere, they described historic eras or events as almost happening to them.
Mm, mm-hmm,
And these, especially the lesbian, gay, trans people in San Francisco who were talking about the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s,
mm-hmm,
they were really trying to change things.
mm-hmm.
And it was so inspiring. And it felt really meaningful to create what turned out to be the first really comprehensive study of a city and its LGBTQ historic places. In terms of preservation, LGBTQ history has commonalities with other marginalized histories of
Sure.
working
Mm-hmm.
class people or people of color, immigrants that often they didn't build the buildings that house their community groups or
Mm-hmm.
their schools or the things that would become landmarks of their community. They
Right.
used ones that were created by other people.
Mm-hmm.
And then they often didn't have control over them. They might not
Right.
own them. They might
Mm-hmm.
not be able to hang on to them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in the instance of Japanese Americans, they were legally prohibited from owning property. So one of the odd, to me, one of the problematic parts about historic preservation is that traditional preservation looks for a building that looks like it did when the historic thing happened.
Sure.
If the
Yeah.
historic thing happened a long time ago and the community whose history is held by that building weren't able to maintain their ownership of it,
Mm-hmm.
it changes. So then it can become ineligible to be a landmark or to be
Right.
protected.
Right.
And that's such a shame. And it's something people have been really trying to address in the context of LGBTQ history until the 70s. Most of that history was consciously done under the radar. You wouldn't call attention to the places you were meeting or
Right. Right.
organizing because there was real danger involved.
Sure. Sure. That makes
So,
sense. Mm.
anyway, but that project, the LGBTQ study, like all my projects, I end up finding a way to apply it to Richmond. And
Mm.
I realized we didn't tell the story of the fact that the World War II home front was an incredibly important turning point in queer history in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
A big part of the reason San Francisco is, considered a gay mecca, queer mecca, is because there was a small but visible lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender community before the war. And when all of these people came to the Bay Area, either to stay and work in defense factories
Mm-hmm.
or were shipped through as military, they saw this. And the people who were queer thought, oh, I don't want to go back to Iowa where I can't be myself. I want to stay here.
Sure.
And so I kept talking to Rosie staff saying, "Oh, we have to tell this story." And so we finally did. Elizabeth Tucker, the former lead ranger, and I worked on this project, and there is still a exhibit up about that.
Mm. And Jim Davis gives a really good talk about it
Oh,
too.
good,
Yeah,
good.
so that's great. At the park. Let's see. Let's pivot to climate change
Mm,
and historic interpretation. And let's talk a little bit about your Hope and History Toolkit that focuses on interpreting the roots of climate change. Um,
so,
what history, why is history critical to climate communication? I mean, it seems kind of like obvious, but what roles can place and heritage play?
mm, um, those of you who live in the Bay Area probably remember our really bad first wildfire seasons, especially that one where, we had a full
Mhm.
day of darkness, covered in smoke. And I had a conversion experience then, and
Mhm.
thought, I can't leave this to my children. This is an all hands on deck event. And I
Mhm.
started thinking, okay, what can I do? I tell stories about place. how can that apply here? And I started looking at what the Park Service was doing and what other historic preservation groups, like the National Trust here and in England, were doing. And mostly they were talking about protecting the places we care about from climate change impacts. And the Park Service would also communicate fairly scientific information about, this many centimeters of sea level rise is going to happen by this date, and it will inundate the visitor center at Rosie the Riveter. And so it's
Oh.
these stories of something that was going to happen
Hmm.
that I felt frozen by those stories. I felt they were either too technical or they were scary without a sense of agency being
Okay.
imparted.
Sure.
And I thought, okay, well, we can figure out stories about place that help people. And it was a story at Rosie the Riveter that gave me the first hook. One of the main interpretive themes at Rosie the Riveter is World War II total mobilization, when everything changed: businesses, government, schools, households, neighborhoods, individual lives changed to meet this immense challenge.
Mm.
And I thought that is exactly the kind of story need right now because it is going to take transformation to
Mhm.
address what's happening to us. And I actually had started on a project in Richmond with the park and the city and a youth group, and then COVID happened.
Mhm.
And I'd met a ranger, Rosie the Riveter, named Elizabeth Villano, who was really interested in being able to talk more about climate change at Rosie. And I said, well, why don't we propose a toolkit where this way of thinking can be spelled out and then shared with all the parks? And luckily, the National Park Climate Change Response Program and the Cultural Resource Office in DC saw value in it. And Elizabeth and I worked on it for 4 years, finished it late in the summer of 2024, right before Trump was elected. And the writing was on the wall. The Park Service knew they weren't going to be able to use it. So it's still on the website, but
Okay.
it has not been able to be systematically implemented with any kind of resources or energy. Uh,
So it's on the Rosie the Riveter National Park website?
No, it's on the National Park Service website. Celia has a link to it.
Okay, great.
Um, yeah, the toolkit is still there. We've also put it on other servers because, in addition to targeting inclusive history, the federal government is targeting communication about climate change right now, too.
Right.
So,
Right. Right. Well, what a great time to pivot to the current moment. In this current moment, we're seeing increased efforts to limit or reshape how history is told in public spaces, including national parks and historic sites, as we know. How is this affecting the field? How can practitioners respond or resist while maintaining public trust? It's one question. Um, I see the Rangers kind of struggling with that. Like, you know, how do we tell this story if we're being told to change it? And in what ways can the public get involved?
um, this is a hard one. And I think if I were park staff, um, I would probably be making a distinction between what I do on the job and what I do outside. And actually, there are people pushing back. Some of you might have heard of Resistance Rangers. I
Hmm.
gave that link to Celia to share. Um, that's a group of off-duty rangers and allies who are trying to push back on what is happening and also let people know because for quite a while this pressure was being exerted on parks and people weren't aware of it enough. There's another project out of University of Minnesota called Save Our Signs that is crowdsourcing anybody sending photographs of interpretation at national parks. I had actually a few weekends ago went and took pictures of everything at Rosie and sent it in. So that as the administration regime goes forward with their plans to take things down, we have a record of what stories were being told and how they were being told. Um, for those of you who haven't been following it a lot, the president and then the Secretary of the Interior, who's over the National Park Service,
Mm.
gave orders telling national parks that they have to remove public material that inappropriately disparages any American or doesn't sufficiently emphasize the beauty, abundance, and grandeur of natural features. And there's been very specific but haphazard communication with parks about what they should do. And so parks have been floundering. One of the articles that Celia dropped is about how unclear and contradictory the communication has been from the administration to parks. If I were a park employee right now, it would be very hard, and I hope we're all giving love to any Park Service employee we're interacting with right now. One of the first things that the administration did that some of you may know about was they posted a QR code at every park and asked visitors to report anything they thought was inappropriately disparaging Americans,
Right.
etc.
Right.
Americans pushed back. The response was overwhelmingly positive, saying we want more diverse histories. We want our parks better funded. And that QR code is still active. And Celia has the link where you can, in your own time,
Mhm.
fill out a questionnaire and send in your comments about how you feel about censoring history and about the parks. Um, there are ways. I mean, I got so mad about this that last summer I helped organize a Protect Our Park, Save Our History event at Rosie. If any of you who are listening were there, drop in the chat whether you were there. It drew about 200 people. It was really great fun. It was on the anniversary of the National Park Service and Rosie's 25th anniversary. So we had birthday cake and a big birthday card, and um, people chalked messages on the sidewalk. And we had very inspiring speakers who drew parallels between censorship in the past or what happened to Japanese Americans and what's happening to immigrants today. And it got tons of press, local press, national press, even radio in Germany and Switzerland. And the reporter for those outlets told me, we love your national parks and we're worried about what you're doing with your history. So he did these stories in German about, oh, Joan. Joan helped me on that event. She's saying in the chat that she was there.
Oh,
Um,
good.
so that's I would love to do another one of those. If there's anybody who wants to do anything, reach out to me because I think it's important that we keep raising our voices. Um, there's also a recent lawsuit that's been filed that I have a little role in. Several national groups, the National Park Conservation Association, the Union of Concerned Scientists, and a couple others are filing a lawsuit, and this great nonprofit law firm, Democracy Forward, is leading it to say to the Trump administration, you can't censor history and science at the national parks. This is our outdoor classroom. It's important that people have places where they can learn about their past, learn about what's happening to the natural environment. Um, so they're someone's saying contact information.
Yeah, we'll cover it
We
at
can
the
put
end.
that in, yeah.
We'll put it
Um,
at the end. Yeah.
I wish I had more specific, like, here's what you can do
Mhm.
right now. Um, Pay attention, fill out that form about the snitch form is what I call it, where they wanted people to say what they,
Right.
don't like, but tell them how much you love national parks and American history in all its full, complicated, painful, and beautiful glory.
let's segue into power, legacy, and historical complexity. It's kind of our last part, our last 5 or 7 minutes or so. We're seeing more public conversation. We kind of touched on this earlier. Uh, Recent disclosures about Cesar Chavez by Dolores Huerta bring this power dynamic strongly into light. How should public historians, oh, well, we kind of covered that one. How about this one? What responsibility do historians have to revisit and revise narratives when like when there's a new perspective?
Mhm. Well, historians always see their role as incorporating new information, new insights. What I think all of us in the general public can benefit from is recognizing kind of what I said earlier. History is something we create and use. It is not some temple on the mount, carved in stone, never changing record. It's stories we tell to make sense of the past, to help us understand the future better, and to help us navigate, no, understand now, the present better, and help us navigate the future.
Right.
It's to me, it's as simple as that. Of course, we have to revise history.
Hmm.
We ask different questions in different moments. So we ask different questions of the past.
Hmm.
And that flexibility and that mutability of history, I think, is one of the things that makes it so valuable to us. It can change to meet our moment.
So here's kind of going back to what we were talking about just a minute ago about kind of like what every person can do, what anyone can do, and how individuals can advocate for preserving community histories or community spaces, um, historical spaces, particularly when there's budget or financial pressure not to.
Yeah, I think supporting national parks through efforts like the Rosie the Riveter Trust are really, really valuable. All of these entities are so starved for resources that any material um, benefits you can share is really important. But I also think that morale, that like showing love to the people who are trying to tell our histories is really useful. One of the women who runs the Save Our Signs program at a University of Minnesota is on a committee with me, and she told us yesterday that she went to Bruce Springsteen's first concert in Minneapolis 2 nights ago, where he started
Okay.
this tour, and
Yeah.
it's a very political
Yeah. Super
um,
exciting.
conference. I mean, a concert. But she said at one point he listed all of the people we should be thanking for resisting, and he included historians and librarians and archivists, which,
Mm.
yeah, like maybe
That makes my heart go pitty
I
pat.
know, I know. So I think
Oh.
getting involved and learning from the histories we've been talking about tonight, that we shape history, we have agency, and therefore we have a responsibility to do what we can, especially in this moment, to pull us away from the backward looking path that Trump is trying to take us on. I mean, the No Kings rallies were reminding us that that's not who we are. We did not sign on to have someone um, exert authoritarian control over us. We are Americans. Our voices are to be listened to, and our relationship to our government is sacred and something we need to be active in.
Right, right.
So there was my soapbox. Forgive
Uh,
me, people.
that's okay. I like it when you're on your soapbox. So in this moment or in moments when history becomes like a point of conflict,
Mhm, mhm.
what gives you hope?
Mm.
What keeps you committed to this work?
Well, especially doing work around people who were trying to make social change. You know, if I'd been a historian of the farm workers, I'd be looking at all of those people, not just Cesar Chavez, but all of those people who worked so hard for rights for a large group of people who live among us who had
Mhm.
been so mistreated over decades. When I referenced earlier, interviewing all of those queer activists, especially the AIDS activists, and knowing, they didn't give up. They kept
Right.
going.
They
And we we don't have a choice. And it's also on my best moments how I think about the challenge of climate change. We don't have a choice. We have to do whatever we can do to protect other people, to protect the planet. And history can be so inspiring because there are so many stories where we didn't know the outcome and something amazing happened. And we can witness that today too. We can make it happen
we
today.
can make it happen. That's where the power is.
Mhm.
Well, we're at 8 o'clock, so that's been a really fascinating hour. Oh my gosh, that went by so fast. Thank
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. A special thank you to Donna for sharing her insight, generosity, deeply thoughtful work with us this evening. Your ability to bring history, community, and place together inspires me so much. And thank you to Rosie the Riveter Trust for making programs like this possible and for supporting the work that preserves and shares these stories. History itself is not fixed in time. It is shaped through what we choose to remember, preserve, and share with each other. In a moment when the stories told in our public spaces can feel both urgent and contested, like we've been talking about so much tonight, each of us has a role to play, me and you. Whether it's asking whose stories are missing, supporting institutions that center inclusive histories, or helping bring forward voices that have been quiet and silenced and overlooked for too long. This is a collective action,
Mhm.
and this work belongs to all of us. So that's my message. You can find Donna I'm going to drop it in the chat here, at www.donnagraves.org. That's her website. I think that's where you can get in contact
Mhm.
with her, and that's where you can see all of her amazing photos and beautiful work, all the things she's doing, a great touch point for people to know what Donna's up to. You can find Rosie the Riveter Trust on Facebook. We're on Instagram. This program will be up on our YouTube channel after we get it downloaded and ready to upload there. So it will be available to review and watch again. In the enduring spirit of Rosie the Riveter's We Can Do It, strike the pose. May each of us leave here a little more committed to telling fuller, more honest histories,
Mhm.
bigger, broader, braver stories, and ensuring that those stories remain visible in the world around us. So, from Rosie the Riveter Trust and Rosie Presents, we wish you a wonderful good night. Thanks so
Thank
much for
you.
being with us. Thank you, Donna.
Thanks all.
Good night.
Good night.